All right, so hey guys, I'm Levi Richards with Formula Champion Show Feeds and Kalmbach Feeds, and what we want to do is just kind of, I guess, introduce you to some of our team members that we've got throughout the country. As you know, Formula Champions is not run by me; it's run by a great team of experts, and I just kind of help lead our team here in the right direction and take on some projects and stuff. But over the next several weeks, I want to introduce you to some of the key people behind the scenes of Formula Champions, introduce you to them, and just kind of talk about some of their specialties and what they do for us. So today I've got a real treat for you. Actually, a very good friend of mine, not just a coworker, but somebody who I call a real good friend, and that's Cody Rice. Cody, jump on here, say hi.
Hey guys, how we doing?
Yep. So what we're going to do is just talk to him a little bit about his background and what he does kind of day to day for us, not only with Formula Champions, but Kalmbach Feeds. And then we'll talk a little bit about, I want to talk with Cody about show steer selection. That's a real good topic for Cody and to pick his brain a little bit. So we'll do that eventually. But Cody, I guess let's start off here and tell us, where you're from and just kind of your background and a little bit about yourself. We've got all the time in the world, so give us the whole details.
Sure, sure. So I grew up in northern West Virginia. I moved into Pennsylvania probably about a decade ago now. I've been working for Kalmbach this past week and actually made 5 years. So time flies when you're having fun. I started out showing when I was 7, 8 years old, so it's been a while ago now. We've moved on to where I've been, unfortunately aged out, and we've started selling cattle now, and my kids are coming up. For Kalmbach, I work a pretty big area. I work West Virginia, Virginia, some of Pennsylvania, all the way down into the Carolinas. So that whole Mid Atlantic region, that Eastern Seaboard. I sell, retail dealers. We do a bunch of that, but make a bunch of farm calls. I'm into commercial poultry as well. So try to be a little bit of a jack of all trades and just be able to help people where we can.
You kind of are, yeah. So you didn't mention much about like your background as far as education. Where'd you go to college? Was it WVU?
Yeah, so I went to West Virginia University. I got a bachelor's of science there in animal nutrition. And then once I started working for Kalmbach, I decided that I wanted to have a master's degree as well. So I went back and I got a master's degree in safety management as well.
Great, great. Now, one thing that you also haven't mentioned, I guess, that you and I kind of have in common, you judge a lot of shows, mainly cattle shows, right? Just cattle shows.
Yeah, yeah, just cattle shows. I judge pretty much all over the Midwest and Mid
Yep,
Atlantic. September's been a pretty
yep.
busy month. We've judged 3 different shows in 3 different places the past couple of weeks here, so it's been rocking and rolling. But yeah, I judge a lot of showmanship, and then a lot of jackpots, and some county fairs, a lot of state shows as well.
Yeah, great. And you've got, so well, I guess you just got done with the Ohio Feeder Calf Roundup, right?
Yeah, two weekends ago. That's one of, to me. I think that's one of the coolest shows out there. West Virginia has one, and then
Yeah,
Ohio has one. Levi, when you and I were growing up, I mean, it was the end thing to be able to hop in your vehicle and actually go to a place and look at calves. And I know we've kind of transitioned
yep,
into this world now to being able to buy cattle online. But just being able to see that there was probably 150 calves there. People came in on Saturday and I was judging it. They actually got to watch me judge, listen to my reasons on
yeah,
why I kind of picked the cattle the way I did. That's kind of a lost
yep.
start.
It is, yeah. And I don't want to age us too much, but like you said, they weren't just running around on social media. There was no Facebook to look up cattle. We kind of had to get on the farm.
Yeah.
So yeah, you still appreciate, or at least we can appreciate, a show like a feeder calf roundup, and yeah, the show and sale type. But that's part of why I wanted to use you and have you talk a little bit about steer selection for us.
Sure.
Is because you had just done that, and I know you do a lot of prospect shows and whatnot. I guess before we get into those details, though, tell us about like your small herd and what you raise, and you've got a little bit of everything there, right?
Yeah, we've got a little bit of everything. So my first son was born in 2012. So I kind of wanted to build some things for Riker and be able to make sure he had an established cow herd whenever he was rocking and rolling. I didn't just want to trade cattle and be a steer jock. I wanted to breed them so he could see that side.
Yeah.
We mainly Simmental based cows, half bloods. For me, it's always worked just a little bit well. Those Simmental cattle's got a little bit more frame, a little bit better hair than some of your Angus. They make great mothers. And then we go all the way back and just made them clubby. I'm trying to get into the key deal a little bit, but it's kind of funny. As soon as you start setting things up, then the kids come along and they change it. So now he wants to get into the shorthorn side of things. So we started 2 years ago trying to incorporate some shorthorns in there. I tell you what, Levi, the embryos is amazing. I mean, before, when we first started, you had to go out and try to buy 10 cows to hit on one. Now you can buy established embryos that are proven. So we should be up and running with the shorthorns here pretty quick.
Cool. I can relate to that. I was that kid that wanted to get into the shorthorns. So you'll quickly figure out exactly.
Yeah. So, but yeah, like I said, we kind of do everything. We don't run a big herd. We run about 20 head of cows. All of those are very hand-picked cows. With the way I travel and stuff, my wife is awesome, and she's the one that takes care of a lot of it for me, so we can't do more than 20. But what's really neat is just about any of the cows that I have, I feel can hit a home run at some point. Couple of years ago, we had a recip that we bred to On God We Trust, and that steer pretty well, and he was pretty close to finishing in the top 10 in crossbred points in the Ohio Best, and he was just out of one of our recip cows. So that herd is very, very hand-picked.
Yep, you bet. Well, let's get into that a little bit. So we talked just a little bit about genetics, and we don't need to go too crazy and play sides or pick favorites, but we're seeing so many of these steers running around for sale that are like clubby genetics, back on clubby genetics, back on clubby genetics. And 5 years ago, that wasn't even a thing. Like we still used a good purebred or foundation piece. So maybe what is something we should be watching when we're looking at some of those, what we're calling zoo bred steers that are clubby. Are we a little bit more worried about structure or soundness on those? What do you think? What's the benefits and what's the issue?
I think you are. I think there's a couple of things that you got to look at with these. The first thing that I would say is, and we'll just throw out some holes there, and I'm not picking sides by any means, but seems to be anymore that the popular crosses is a here I am on a monopoly. And sometimes you can get a couple of big ones in there that's got some frame, and sometimes they're on the opposite side. I think when we're going out and we're selecting steers nowadays, the first thing we got to do is start studying the cannon bone, because it can be really easy to fall in love with these super hairy ones that are really good necked, but if they don't have much cannon bone, I think you're going to struggle to get them big enough. So I think that's kind of the first thing that you need to look at is let's see if they're going to be big enough first. And then we're going to follow on that. I mean, we need to start at the ground on these cattle and start making sure that they have plenty of flex in that pastern, that make them walk, make sure that they can get out and hit their stride. They're not popping. I mean, this is one that I'm still kind of flirting with, which is the DS carriers. I remember when TH became a thing, and we always called TH the hair gene. What I've kind of been noticing about some of these DS cattle is a lot of carriers seem to have ankle problems, especially when we set them out into motion. So if we're just kind of paying attention to that, and I know we work for a feed company, and I love what we do, and I see about it on Facebook all the time. How stout does the steer have to be, or how sound does he have to be at his end point? And I've seen some people comment on, I'm going to be right up front and honest with you. If those cattle, have some structure issues at 600 pounds, they are not going to be able to fix that by the time they're 1,400 pounds. It's going to continually get worse. We could throw supplements at them, but at the end of the day, you're still going to get beat by a sound one.
Yeah, totally. Let's talk about that for a second. We'll back up just a little bit and talk about, you said that flex down at the ground. Let's talk about that for a second. Just that overall kind of structure piece and that foundation. right down at the ground. We're talking about that angle that, right setting at their feet, coming back into their pasterns. Not only do
Yes.
we want them to have angle at their hock, which that's going to help that fluid motion, but we also want them to be softer ankled and have a little bit more of that angularity down and that cushion, maybe you hear it called, more than anything else. But that's what he's referring to, and that's where he's talking about the popping. And actually, real quick, I've got a cool slide that kind of shows that. So let's look at this slide right here. It says structure 101. Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. So we've got two pictures of two very different steers, and if you've ever been to any of my clinics before or watched any of my some of our online clinics, you'll see this slide. And I've been using this exact slide with these two exact pictures for years now, but they just do such a good job showing night and day difference as far as structural build in cattle. You can look at that steer on the left that's a lot straighter shouldered, has zero cushion down at the ground. He really comes out of that ground at a 90-degree angle. We want to avoid cattle like this because they just don't get out and move, even at this size, but especially, when they're 1350 or at their end point. He also slopes from hooks to pins. His tailhead's kind of buried down into him, just not structurally ideal. And I can tell you, because years and years and years ago, we fed that guy and it just never got any better. Stuff like that just progresses to get worse as they put more weight on. And that's just not the kind you want to feed. So I don't know, Cody, do you want to describe the one on the right and just, where you see the big benefits there?
Yeah. All right. Just had to move it so I could see it. Yeah, the one there on the right, everyone wants to talk about just being able to judge structure on cattle from the ground up. But I think there's plenty of times whenever you can start studying cattle from the top down, and by the time you get down there, you'll know what structural problems you have. If you just kind of take a look how that steer there on the right comes out of the top of his shoulder and just how smooth and fluid. Typically, you can go down, you can start forward over his knee. When you get down and study him into his knee, he's got a banana set to him. And whenever they do that, they're really good on that front end. Whenever you look at the steer there on the left, he gets just a little bit weak there behind his shoulder, which causes him to jut up coming out of the top. That point of his shoulder is almost level there with his knee. And that's the type of thing that no matter the conditions or how you feed them, you're just not going to be able to overcome that. And then you move on back further on those calves, you can kind of see that steer there on the left is a little weak in his flank. And I'm not the type of person that starts pounding the table that we got to have super deep flanked cattle whenever they're babies. I think we can feed a lot of flank into them, especially with fat. But
we'll talk about that here in a second, because I think that's a really important thing, and I'm glad you said it that way. So keep going. But we'll come back to the flank thing.
But typically, whenever you start seeing calves at this age, for me, that gets a little bit high in that flank, the first thing that I do is immediately go up and study their tailhead set. Typically, I find that cattle that are just a little bit higher flanked, just kind of sit down with that tailhead and they kind of drop from their hooks to their pins. Just it can be, very, very out there and very obvious, or it can be ever so slightly. But that's why I kind of wanted to bring up that flank. To me, I think that whenever you study cattle, there's a couple of just little things you can look for, and as soon as you see it, it should just pop in your mind, hey, I need to go here and study it. And then you study him down at the ground there, and that's a prime example of a steer that you can just tell he just doesn't have a ton of flex into his pasterns or into his hock. And what happens there is whenever you set that guy out in motion, sometimes they can jut up in their loin, they can miss their stride. There's a couple of different ways that you can go around it. And I'm not saying you can't get that steer to his endpoint. One thing that I'm saying is if you're new into this or you're not comfortable with it, sometimes it can be really tough to be able to manage these type of things. So let's just try to find good sound cattle that are a little bit easier to manage, and then we can roll with it from there.
You bet. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting point that you brought about the ones being high flanked and steep tipped. That's an interesting correlation, because you don't think about them kind of having a hand-in-hand connection, but they're never going to get any better at either spot. Like you could get a really steep one,
Yeah.
a steep hip one fat, and that flank's still never going to drop just because of the way he's built inside. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up. Let's talk about that flank a little bit. I actually, funny that we bring it up because I've gotten 2 messages this morning about what we do to drop flanks on young calves. And it's, I understand it's an issue. We want to buy green cattle. I like buying green cattle this time of year. I've got a green calf in the barn. But, I think the best thing to do is just feed the dang thing, and let's just feed him complete feed, and let's just really start pushing on him a little bit. We can add a little bit of, some fiber to it, but I don't want you guys going crazy and adding, 4 or 5 pounds of, beet pulp, or even our filler up for that matter, and trying to really just load him up on fiber, because, I think in the long run, you're going to be hurting yourself on trying to get him chubby enough. There's only so many pounds of intake we're going to get on that steer. Let's make sure that we're using fat for our gains and for our condition and bloom, and not just trying to fill that one little spot.
Yeah.
You agree?
No, Levi, I completely agree with you there. I see a lot of people trying to throw fiber at cattle. And to me, especially when we're talking about steers there, it's completely different. Those steers, their cogs and their navels don't have to be so low to the ground there that we worry about them getting frostbite in the winter. I'm a firm believer that the more middle that you throw into a steer, the more you take away from up high. And when we're trying to get these guys done and ready for our county fair there, or state fair, whatever it might be, we need to make sure that we have some top shape and some red meat. And I think plenty of times that whenever we're throwing fiber at these, we end up dropping the center portion of the body, and the forerib stays up high. That flank might come down a little bit, but it's not enough because we just keep dropping the center portion of that body. And for me, I think we need to be able to get these cattle just a little fatter. And then I think that that forerib comes down along with that flank. And then I think that we have just a better silhouette on those cattle while maintaining top shape.
Yes. Now I put up another slide, and this it's kind of funny, and I totally chuckle about it, especially that rear view picture on the top right. But this is what we've seen in 4-H books forever. And no, please don't take this with you when you're out on a pasture looking for the right calf to bring home. Just know the fundamentals. But the reason why I bring this up is because, this picture it is older than me, so I know it's older than you. So let's say this picture is maybe going on 40 years old. But a lot of these things that we do want on our livestock today still hold true. It's just the trends have kind of changed, and they come in a little bit different styles and packages. But we still want one with a real long front end. We still want a well-sprung middle and a stout featured steer from behind. I threw up a picture of this shorthorn steer because I felt like he was real nice and square, huge topped, really thick, and still got out and moved really well. That's kind of a real good rear view shot of a steer and what we're looking at right now. So
absolutely. And I was familiar with that steer, Levi, and I think you can kind of attest to it too. Whenever you got behind that steer, just unbelievable mass. He's pulled apart in his pen set. He's got loin edge. But whenever you got to the side and looked at him, Levi, he was balanced. That he wasn't one of those belly dragging cattle that everybody's talking about now.
Right. You almost, when you saw that steer from the side, you almost didn't expect him to be that stout. And I think that's what I liked about him so much. He was really pleasantly surprising when you got behind him. It's easy to find them this thick at a young age when they're almost too mature, too young, or too early maturing. So we got to make sure we're still buying them green and just go with those fundamentals. Real good feet and legs, real square hip, good front end. I wish I had a really young picture of that calf to share right now, because he was really impressive, but he was skinny. Like I said, I like him skinny this time of year. Let's move on to another slide. And this isn't, our most recent champion, but I like using this picture because you can just see, the overall like outline and silhouette of this steer is as close to ideal as you can build one. I think he's really soft-footed. He's square-hipped, but you can tell he's stout. He's big-middled. That neck is nice and long, but comes out of the top of his shoulder blade. I mean, that's just a good steer.
We're talking about the black and white one?
Black and white one, at MLE. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To me, that thing is so fresh, which, whenever you get cattle that stout, it can be a little bit hard to keep them that fresh. But to me, I think you're absolutely right. I think that guy is balanced in his forerib. It goes back to his rear flank. I think that guy is exceptional to his tailhead. That steer's got a lot of great pieces about him that we should model some more cattle after nowadays.
And if I told you if we went into pedigree on that steer, your head would spin. So we won't do that right now. It's just kind of funny. But and I don't use pictures of my own cattle for these examples because I think my cattle are the greatest in the world. They're not. We've been lucky to do a few things through the years, but they're the pictures that I have on hand. So that's why they get thrown in there. But this was a real good steer that I sold to the Becker family from Michigan, and they had an incredible year and just a really good run with him. Winning several shows throughout the winter, and then he made the Sale of Champions at Michigan Livestock Expo. So, he just kind of got it done, but he was always just so well balanced and just put together so well. And he was a little bit older steer, so they were able to just kind of coast him along and never had to push him too hard. Yeah. I mean, that was just a real good one. So, we're not going to talk heifers today. I wasn't really planning on using those slides, but God, when you start talking about this stuff, it's almost stupid not to. So, let's get out of screen share here.
Yeah, and Levi, I think the most important thing that we can talk about that I try to work with all my families on that buy cattle for me is we can talk about buying them, that making sure that they're sound, that they're going to be big enough. I think you have to go in and I think you have to pick one show that you want to win.
Sure.
You have to set a goal. I sold a steer a couple of years ago, and I'll tell you the pedigree on it's a little bit different. It was an onset on a monopoly cow. So you had some of those older Hooterman genetics in there. They get better the older that they mature. But we had sold that steer for a county fair in July. Now, we sold him in August, and he won a jackpot show in September. And I tell you that because the jackpot show was just something extra. We were feeding that steer specifically for that county fair, and I think that we have to do that. If our county fair is in July, I don't think we need to be going out and buying a calf that's born in April or May. If we're going to be shooting one for Louisville, you can get an older one and hold them a little bit, but maybe a March, April, May calf fits better for Louisville. You have to know what show that you want to win. If you want a jackpot one all day long and your county fair gives you $2 a pound for the grand champion, that's fine. We're going to feed them. We're going to feed them different. And then our situations and our focus changes. But that's the biggest thing that I tell any buyers or anybody I'm working with on feed. I need you to give me one date. Okay.
Yep.
Now, I think our feeding program is so phenomenal that if we pick a county fair, we can win jackpots along the way.
Absolutely.
Because we can keep those cattle fresh. But we have to make sure we have a goal in mind.
Sure. Yep. You bet. No, I love that. And, very rarely do you see the same one wins the early jackpot shows that still goes on and wins. And I'm not saying it's impossible. It has been done. And there are some of those great ones that win all year long and then we'll still go out and win Denver and just be like, oh my God, that thing is still alive. Yet here he is winning. They're out there, but those ones are far and few between and they cost you a couple extra dollars at the end of the day too.
Just a couple.
Yeah. So you're right. You should have a target, maybe you have a prospect steer at home and a state fair steer at home, something for early on and later on, or just a little bit of variety there. So that's kind of all I had. I'm glad that I chose you to kind of get on here and talk about this because you bring in some really interesting points, and I like the way you describe some of those things. Any last minute advice? Don't give me any breeders specifically or play any favorites, but any last minute advice you have for those families that are still out looking for steers?
Yeah, I do have a couple of things. One, make sure whoever you're dealing with is reputable. And I'm not saying that you have to go out and buy from somebody that sells 10 steers for $30,000 a year. Levi, you and I talked about it. A lot of those steers start somewhere at $2,500 and then they keep getting traded and reappraised. But you can tell a lot by somebody just by how somebody wants to speak with you. How fast do they get back with you on the texting? if you ask for pictures or more videos, are they willing to do it? My favorite thing is if I'm dealing with somebody that I've never dealt with before, it's my favorite question is, hey, can you send me a picture of that calf's hook and what on the wash rack? And you'll get a real good insight into how that person, is. So make sure that whoever you're dealing with is reputable, and somebody that is willing to help you along the way. And then, Levi, you and I have talked about it too. The one thing I want to tell people is you don't have to have a $10,000 setup to be able to make this cattle thing work. As long as we can keep those cattle out of the sunlight, keep them cool, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a cool room. Genetics plays a lot into it, but as long as we can have airflow and cool air and just keep regenerating it, watch what kind of bedding that you're using. But I don't want anybody to get discouraged when we're looking into this cattle deal. And right now, what cattle are appraising for is phenomenal for the breeders. But don't feel because, down the road 10 miles, somebody's got a $25,000 setup. Well, they might have a $25,000 setup and a minimum wage work ethic. So as long as you've got a great work ethic and you're willing to make it work, this cattle deal can treat you pretty well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, I guess beyond that, like you said, our feeding program does just work. We've done so much work and so much research behind the actual feeds themselves. There is no steer out there that we can't feed right. We talk about feeding the phenotype, and today is not the day to go through the program. We will do that again soon, but we can do about anything we need to do with about any steer you throw at us. And that's the exciting thing, is the tools are there. We just got to know how to use them at the right time. So, I guess watch for details, reach out. If you need to get a hold of us, you can find us on Facebook, just Formula Champions, which is where this video is going to play. So you're probably already there. You can get on our website. It's formulachampions.com, and you can see a list of some of the people that are, behind the scenes with Formula Champions, and be able to reach out to them and get more information on our feed program right on that website too. So a lot of good information. Do you have anything else before we go?
That's all I got, Levi. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I usually wrap up these things with saying you're not truly feeding to win unless you're feeding Formula Champions. So
that's right.
You guys have a good day, and hope to talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.